Hello everybody and thank you for clicking on this video. I must apologise, I sound like shit. I got really bad sinusitis, it's been hell. But one thing that's really cheered me up is the fact that Sunderland AFC have done it. Regis Labrie has pulled off one of the greatest tactical masterstrokes in playoff history. Actually flicked the switch, got Sunderland from 5 defeats in a row to beating Coventry and getting through to the playoff final, where we will now face Sheffield United at Wembley. We can all start planning our trip to London on the 24th. So exciting, really can't wait. So I thought it'd be a good time to look back at every time Sunderland have visited Wembley Stadium over the years. We begin with the 1937 FA Cup final. This was Sunderland's second FA Cup final, but the first one in 1913 was played at the Crystal Palace. 1937 was the first time that Sunderland visited Wembley Stadium. 93,000 people turned up to see Sunderland take on Preston North End, and Sunderland won the game 3-1. Preston took the lead on the 38th minute with Frank O'Donnell scoring the goal, but then the second half Sunderland took over and Bobby Gurney got the equaliser on the 52nd minute before Rach Carter scored on the 72nd. Eddie Burbanks then sealed the deal on the 78th minute and Sunderland won the game 3-1. Before the game, the teams were greeted by George VI just 11 days before his coronation, and the trophy was presented by Queen Elizabeth. Unbelievable day in Sunderland's history, and Sunderland got off to a winning start at Wembley. Next up we move to 1973, and the one that most people know, it's the big one. Leeds United versus Sunderland on the 5th of May 1973. It was one of the biggest shocks in the history of the competition. Sunderland were a second division side. No second division side had won the FA Cup since West Brom in 1931, and were up against Leeds United at the time under Don Revie when they were a force in this country. Only the one goal came in the 32nd minute, Ian Porterfield. But this game really is mostly remembered for Jimmy Montgomery and his double save. Monty dived to palm away a close range header from Trevor Cherry. It then fell into the path of Peter Lorimer, who absolutely smashed that ball, and it should have been straight in the back of that net, but Montgomery managed to get a hand to it and he diverted the ball onto the underside of the bar, and then it was scrambled out and cleared. It is the greatest save of all time, and it come to typify that game. It's one of the most legendary football games in general, really, not just FA Cup or Sunderland games. It's one of the most legendary football games, and it got Sunderland to 2-0 in their Wembley run. Fast forward 12 years and the next one was the 1985 Milk Cup final between Norwich City and Sunderland. And here we arrive at Sunderland's first Wembley disappointment. Sunderland went into the game in very high spirits. They actually beat Norwich only like 8 days earlier at Carrow Road. It all went wrong in the space of a couple of minutes at the start of the second half. Gordon Chisholm's own goal in the 46th minute was followed only a few minutes later by Clive Walker hitting the post when taking a penalty. And that was all she wrote, and Norwich went on to win the game 1-0. Real disappointment for the Sunderland fans, who carried on singing as the team got their runners-up medals and Norwich got their winners' medals and the trophy. And it seemed like Sunderland had missed out on Europe, but because of the high sell incident, English teams were banned from Europe, so Norwich didn't get to claim their prize of playing in Europe. And both teams got relegated, so Norwich went from thinking they were going to be playing in Europe the following season to playing second division football. That must be soul destroying. Sunderland's Wembley record at this point, 2-1. The next one sort of doesn't count, but I'm going to mention it anyway. In 1988, on Saturday the 16th of April, it was the first day of the Mercantile Credit Football Festival, aka the Football League Centenary Tournament. Sunderland faced Wigan Athletic in a 40-minute game which ended 0-0, so therefore it went to a sudden death penalty which Wigan won 2-1. I thought it's worth mentioning, but I don't think it actually really counts, so Sunderland's record remains 2-1. 2 years later though, Sunderland were back at Wembley with one which very, very much counted, but was rather funky. The 1990 Football League Second Division playoff final between Swindon Town and Sunderland was, in the end, very, very controversial. Now, I live in the southwest, I know a lot of Swindon fans, and I hear this all the time.
That was the most one-sided 1-0 game you've ever seen in your life, mate.
The one goal game from Alan McLaughlin, and yeah, apparently, I've never watched it, it wasn't a very good game at all. Swindon deserved to go through, and that was the end of that. However, Swindon Town had been very, very naughty boys and been cooking their books, and as a result, they were denied their promotion, so Sunderland went up instead. Yeah, an interesting day. Sunderland lost a playoff final, but still went up. That puts their record at Wembley at 2-2. Next up was 1992 and the FA Cup final, Sunderland's most recent FA Cup final, and their final one at the old Wembley. This was the first FA Cup final to feature a second division team since Queen's Park Rangers reached the final in 1982, and the last until Millwall played at Cardiff in 2004. Guess who Millwall beat in the semis to reach that? Liverpool was still an absolute force at this point. They'd been winning all their titles. They didn't know that they were about to embark on a 30-year league drought. Despite being underdogs, Sunderland had the better of the first half. But unfortunately, it was Michael Thomas who opened the scoring on the 47th minute. Yet again, Sunderland conceding really early into the second half at Wembley. He scored the first goal of the game, and then Ian Rush scored to make it 2-0, and Liverpool went on to win the game. In quite a funny story, during the presentation, Liverpool were accidentally given the losers' medals and Sunderland were given the winners' medals. This was later rectified by the players and they swapped over, but yeah, that's a funny little story. I didn't know that until I read it for this video. Sunderland wore a special edition version of their 91-94 shirt with FA Cup final Wembley 1992 around the badge, and we'll get back to that in a little bit. Unfortunately, this meant that Sunderland's Wembley record now stood at 2 wins and 3 defeats. Next up is a absolute gut-wrencher. It's the 1998 First Division playoff final, Charlton Athletic versus Sunderland. After an unbelievable tie against Sheffield United with what is still to this day described as the best atmosphere ever at the Stadium of Light, Sunderland reached the final and their final game at the old Wembley. And what an absolute mental game this was. Nicky Summerby would score in the 99th minute, and surely Sunderland were going to go on and win the game. No, that man Clive Mendonca completed his hat-trick in the 103rd minute to force penalties, and we all know how that went. 7-6 to Charlton. It was Michael Gray who failed to convert his penalty, and thus Charlton were promoted and Sunderland had another year in this First Division. Probably a blessing in disguise really, because Sunderland managed to strengthen again and they went up the following year with 105 points and then went on to finish 7th in the Premier League 2 years in a row. Unfortunately, this isn't the last we're going to hear about Charlton Athletic. Sunderland would have to wait 16 years for their return to Wembley. By this point, Wembley would be demolished and completely rebuilt. Sunderland would go through hundreds of players, numerous managers and even owners. It would be the Capital One Cup final on the 2nd of March 2014 where Sunderland would make their debut at the brand new stadium. Going into the game as massive underdogs against now Manchester City, a force in football, Sunderland actually took the lead in the 10th minute through Fabio Borini, and my head nearly exploded in that moment. Sunderland went into half-time winning in a major cup final, but in the second half it would all fall apart in the 55th minute with Colo Touré, Yaya Toure. He kicked the ball from a large distance and it went in. And then only 1 minute later, Samir Nasri would score another absolute banger and the game was turned on its head. And from there, Manchester City just took a hold and there was an absolute cheap shot at the end to score a third goal. 3-1 was a bit unfair. Manchester City, though, in the end, just another day at the office for them. For Sunderland, they did themselves really proud at Wembley and the fans got to see the new stadium for the first time. It was disappointing. That put Sunderland's Wembley record at 2-5. 5 years later, Sunderland were back in a trophy final, but it was a little bit less prestigious. It was the Checkatrade Trophy final against Portsmouth. Before this game even kicked off, it was the biggest EFL Trophy final of all time. With an attendance of 85,621, it smashed the previous record from the 80s, and pundits described the game as being an FA Cup from another decade. Sunderland took the lead in the 38th minute with Aidan McGeady scoring a free kick, and Sunderland went in at half-time 1-0 up. Now, unfortunately, Sunderland at the time were managed by a man called Jack Ross, who his goal in life was to win games 1-0. So as soon as Sunderland went 1-0 up, he would just try and defend the 1-0 lead. So he did that, and of course, Portsmouth equalised on the 82nd minute. So at the end of 90 minutes, it was 1-1, which Sunderland got about 100 1-1 draws that season. Jamal Lowe would then put Portsmouth ahead in the 114th minute before Aidan McGeady somehow managed to equalise in the 119th to send the game to penalties. It would be Lee Cattermole who would fail to score his goal. Why did our captain George Honeyman not take a penalty? Why did Charlie White, the striker, not take a penalty? Why was Cattermole even put in a position to take one? I do not know, but it cost Sunderland and we had lost an EFL Trophy final. Sunderland's record went to 2-6. But Sunderland only had to wait 7 weeks before their return to Wembley. It would have been nice to have won the EFL Trophy, but it was the playoffs that Sunderland really needed to win. But Jack Ross seemed to double down on it. Nabi Sarr scored a really embarrassing own goal just 5 minutes into the game to give Sunderland the 1-0 lead. And that was it. Jack Ross wanted that 1-0 win. And so we sat back, we let Charlton play for basically 90 minutes. Ben Purrington scored in the 34th minute, but then a German called Patrick Bauer scored in the 94th minute. This was horribly foreshadowed by Lyndon Gooch scoring a last minute winner in the opening game of the season. So who would have thought it that at the end of the season Charlton would then turn it on Sunderland. Charlton went up, Sunderland stayed down. A total disaster for Sunderland, a second season in League One. Who could have thought that? Little did we know there was more to come. The record now 2-7. In 2021, Sunderland reached the EFL Trophy Final once again, now called the Papa John's Trophy Final. The game was played behind closed doors. Sunderland faced Tranmere Rovers, who were in the 4th Division, and Sunderland won 1-0 for their first Wembley win in 48 years. It came on the 57th minute. Aidan McGeady with one of the best passes you've ever seen at Wembley Stadium. Doesn't matter what competition it was an exquisite pass, and Lyndon Gooch managed to get to it. Perfectly weighted shot, and the curse was over, and Sunderland got to lift the trophy. They missed out on it in 2019. This felt like they were just righting that wrong. They got to win the trophy, take it home. It's EFL Trophy, it's not a prestigious trophy, but during COVID when it was illegal to watch the game with your dad, it was a really nice morale booster, and I really enjoyed this. But more importantly, it proved that Sunderland can win at Wembley. Sunderland's record, 3-7. Sunderland returned to Wembley 1 year later for the 2022 League One playoff final against Wycombe Wanderers. This felt like this was it. Sunderland needed to win this game and break out after 4 seasons in League One. It took just 12 minutes for Sunderland to break the deadlock, with Elliot Embleton scoring a fantastic goal. And then in the 79th minute, Ross Stewart sealed the deal, and you just knew at that moment Sunderland were back in the Championship. Everyone was brilliant that day. Alex Pritchard got man of the match. He was absolutely outstanding, got the assist for both goals. And it felt like Sunderland really were on the rise. 2 wins in a row at Wembley and back in the Championship. Sunderland, of course, then went on to get in the playoffs in the Championship the following year. The record now stands at 4-7, and our next game at Wembley will be in a couple of weeks' time, the 2025 Championship playoff final against Sheffield United. During the regular season, Sheffield United won 1 game, Sunderland won 1 game, so now we have the tiebreaker on neutral ground. It's going to be a really exciting game. Sheffield United will feel like they are the favourites, and I presume most pundits will agree. But you never know. You never know. We can only dream. We can believe that we can do this. Sunderland can go to Wembley, get that win, and get back in the Premier League for the first time in 8 years. Let's all collectively believe that we can do this. See you at Wembley in a few weeks. If you've watched this video, it's been a long one. Thank you very much. I hope it's brought back some happy memories. I know it'll have brought back a few unhappy ones, but let those happy memories outweigh the sad ones. And let's, in May 2025, create some more happy ones.